Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, May 6, 2022. The Billionaire Minimum Income Tax Proposal. Recently, the Biden administration announced a new way to impose a tax on the very wealthy. It's called the Billionaire Minimum Income Tax, or the BMIT. A recent article in Fortune magazine explained the BMIT. The White House says that billionaires pay an average of only 8.2% of their income in federal taxes. Now, while the name implies that the new tax is aimed at billionaires, it will actually apply to U.S. households with a net worth in excess of $100 million. The tax will be on earned income and unrealized gains. For example, a taxpayer purchased stock in January 2017 for $500, and that stock's value has now risen to $900. On paper, the taxpayer has made $400. And under this proposal, that taxpayer must pay taxes on that $400 even though he hasn't sold the stock and doesn't actually have that $400 gain in hand. If these taxpayers pay less than 20% of their earned and unrealized income in income tax, they'd be required to pay an additional 5%. Now, most Americans know that, like the original income tax, the promise to impose this new tax only on the very wealthy is just a start. Soon, people making $100,000 a year will be considered wealthy. Now, soon after the BMIT proposal was released to the public, Senator Joe Manchin announced that he would not support it, and in the equally divided Senate, this ensured that it would not be passed. Now, let's look at Samuel Adams in the BMIT. A statue of Samuel Adams stands in front of Boston's Faneuil Hall. Now, Samuel Adams was the cousin of John Adams. Samuel Adams was a leader of Bostonians who protested the British Parliament's attempt to impose taxes and restrict the economic and personal rights of the American colonists. For a time, King George's ministers reacted to the protests from America and repealed the acts. It was said that each time this was done, Samuel Adams cried. He had been convinced that the American colonies had to be independent and that the acts of Parliament were lighting a fuse that, if allowed to burn, would ignite a rebellion in the colonies. Now, many have asked, why don't the wealthy advocate for the fair tax? Well, some have. In fact, the founders and early supporters of AFFT who funded the research for the fair tax were all very wealthy men and women. Most of them were paying very low income tax rates under the current system. Now, they told me that they would pay far more in federal taxes under the fair tax, but the fair tax was the right thing to do to ensure that their children and grandchildren have the same opportunities and freedoms that they enjoyed. And they weren't just talking. They backed up their words with over $20 million and countless hours of donated time. So, when will the wealthy learn? The present administration's attacks against Amazon, Facebook, and Google, whose owners were big supporters of President Biden in the 2020 election, illustrate the fate of billionaires who support the present administration. Well, what do they expect? These billionaires and many other very wealthy people who are very vocal in their support of progressive government are finding out that that support is appreciated, but it doesn't really change the attitude that somehow the wealthy should always be paying more. Like Samuel Adams, many of us cried when Senator Manchin announced that he would not support the proposed billionaire minimum tax. Can you imagine the expressions of outrage from the wealthy if this bill appeared to have enough support to pass? In conclusion, in almost all cases, our wealthy fellow citizens believe in our nation and don't want to destroy or harm it. They may be brilliant in business, but they seem to believe that the policies that enable them to amass their great wealth should be changed because somehow they're just not fair. Now, this plays right into the plans that the D.C. elites, their minions in Congress, and the White House have to fundamentally change America by moving more control to them, the smart people, and away from us, the not-so-smart people. The wealthy and any others who believe the ruling class's propaganda should read this quote from Winston Churchill in 1940 when he was talking about people who wanted to appease Hitler. Each one hopes that if he feeds the crocodile enough, the crocodile will eat him last. All of them hope that the storm will pass before their turn comes to be devoured. But I fear greatly that the storm will not pass. It will rage and it will roar ever more loudly and ever more widely. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the FAIRtax. Now, all Americans, and not just the wealthy, must join us before it's too late and the wonderful country we love is further harmed. Join us and take back control of our country, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. And we should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the FAIRtax. Take back control. Help us pass the FAIRtax. The IRS will be gone and we'll pay our taxes when we make purchases. We, not the ruling class and their minions in D.C., will decide how much federal tax we pay, and we'll know how much tax we're paying because taxes will no longer be hidden from us. They'll be clearly shown on every retail receipt. If you have friends who don't know about the FAIRtax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the FAIRtax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the FAIRtax and learn why the FAIRtax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.